All right, in this two-part lecture series, I'll do 10 minutes on this video and 10 minutes on the other. I'd like to introduce the topic or the concept of indigenous religions to you. And it might be a good idea to listen to these videos before you read the textbook. I mean, if you've already read this chapter in your textbook, then that's okay. But moving forward, I'm thinking that maybe these videos would be helpful to you, just to sort of orient you generally, and then the textbook can kind of fill in any of the other details there. So if you recall back a couple of videos ago, maybe it was the last video, I said it's difficult to define what religion is, and it's in part because religion is a vague term. And that's just going to be the case when it comes to indigenous religion. So it's still going to be a term that's difficult to define in any kind of definitive way. What we can say is that indigenous religions are a loosely defined group. But although it's loosely defined, we are able to group it together around a number of themes. And it's these themes that I want to talk about in this lecture. A couple general points before we talk about these themes. It is very easy when we're looking at indigenous religions to misunderstand and to perhaps look down upon or think that something sounds silly, or it's primitive in a sort of a pejorative sense, sort of like too basic or childish. And this is a problematic way to approach the study of indigenous religions, and it highlights the fact that we carry our own biases into the study of different religions. So remember when I actually mentioned that there's a test that you can take, an implicit association test, where you can identify or try to identify the different biases you have toward certain religions. Now, nowhere more than here is it going to be the case that you need to really watch what cultural assumptions that you're carrying into your beginning understanding of indigenous religions. So again, try as much as possible to just put it on hold, like what you think about anything. Try to just put everything on hold and think about what people in another part of the world that you've never even heard of came to believe, given their own circumstance. And it's a tough thing to do, but it's important. We can't just apply our understanding onto other understandings so easily. Now, the term indigenous, let's just start with that. And it means pertaining to a certain area. I guess it would make sense to say you are indigenous to your hometown. It might be kind of weird to say that. But the sense of place is important here. And so the sense of place is important in the development of indigenous religions. I want to point out that these religions thrive and develop in certain locations, and they don't spread in the same way that the major religions have, at least not until the advent of the internet, which is a whole different thing. So let me back up and say, let's just look at a certain case in point. We look at the island of Haiti, and then we can look at Haitian voodoo. It's considered an indigenous religion. It's important to understand that this developed on an island, and it developed at a time when there wasn't the internet, and it developed at a time when there wasn't phones and fax machines and whatever else could have been, the Morse code. I don't know what people used to communicate before this. That it developed in a certain location among a certain group of people. That's important to understand. It is specific to that area. Although what we find is, and this is a kind of like a mystery to me, not kind of like a mystery, it is a mystery to me, that indigenous religions from all over the world, and indigenous religions have developed all over every single spot on this planet, but they all grew up and kind of came to similar conclusions about the world and humans' place in it. And that's pretty profound. And that's, I mean, whether you believe in God, whether you're a Christian, whether you're a Muslim, whether you're a Hindu, you have to think that that's pretty interesting right there. There's got to be a some kind of psychological, sociological research going on to shed light on this, but it's there's no answer to it. It's a mystery for sure. So all of these religions cropped up, and they have similar features. These features that I'm going to highlight right now. Let me, before I do that, say, well, let's just start with one of the basic features. In these indigenous religions, everything is alive. And that might sound weird to say. How could a rock be alive? Or how could your pencil be alive? And this is what I'm saying. You have to really just put your conceptions on hold and think about. And I'm not gonna argue that rocks are alive. I'm gonna say, let's suspend our judgment and think about it through another lens. But everything is alive, and inanimate objects can possess spiritual power. Spiritual power is called mana, M-A-N-A, and you'll encounter that in your textbook. These religions are sometimes called primal. Not primitive, but primal. Primitive is a term you'll hear. I don't like the term very much because it implies a sort of lack of sophistication, when I don't think that's necessarily the case at all. It's a lot of misunderstanding has made people, or brought people to think that indigenous religions lack sophistication, because they're often very complex systems. We don't, and if we're applying the wrong rubric to understand them, then we're not very good judges of how complex they are. So I don't like the word primitive, but primal is fine, because primal means, in the term, like numerical, meaning first. So these traditions are oral often, and what I mean when I say oral tradition is that they the beliefs passed down through word of mouth, as opposed to textual traditions such as Judaism, Christianity, Islam, and so on, that we'll study later. So they're oral traditions as opposed to textual traditions, meaning that they often have no sacred texts. And I think that's a common theme throughout all of them. If you find one that has a sacred text, it would be an exception to a general rule. They are rituals and stories are passed down from generation to generation by direct contact, by teaching, father to son, mother to daughter, mother to son, so on. Now, the roots of indigenous religions go back much further than Judaism and Hinduism, and this is another area where it's just a mystery. And if anybody tries to give you a sense that we know about the origin of religion, that scholars have a current understanding of how religion developed, I mean, it's not really true. We can speculate, and we might have theories about how religion developed, but we simply don't know. We know this because it was, in part because it was before recorded history, and we don't know sort of the details that emerged. And I said this before, but I want to say it again. Every spot on this planet has been touched by indigenous religions. So even areas today, it's important to consider even areas today where another religion might be the dominant religion, like in the United States, for example. We could look back to Native American beliefs and their religions, and this is a larger cultural system sort of came in and however you want to word it, committed genocide, pushed aside the Native Americans, and just kind of like decimated that culture and those teachings. But it's nonetheless important to understand that the ground where you are standing right now is a place where indigenous religions were once flourishing, and this is the case for all over the planet. Now, one point that we could make before, I might have to split this video up into two parts here. One point we could make is that indigenous religions will differ in their view of humans' relation to the earth. So, for example, we might not say this, but it's kind of implicit in just how we act. We think that we're more important than a lot of other living things on this planet. We might think we're more important than the planet itself. Now, if we say it, if I asked you, do you think we're more important than this planet? That's kind of a loaded question. And you might say, no, I don't think, but it's just how we act. And we tend to act as if we're like the biggest deal on the planet. Well, indigenous religions generally see it as humans play a small part in a much bigger picture. And that the planet and that the whole earth and all of the living beings are other parts that are not necessarily lesser than, that everything has to work in a kind of harmony in order to for there to be kind of like a spiritual balance. So that's a kind of a common theme throughout a lot of indigenous religions. How about one more point, and then I'll split the video up and we'll make this two parts. I already said that the concept of mana means spiritual power. And then I also said that objects can be alive. Now, objects can possess mana. Objects can possess spiritual power. Places can possess spiritual power. Think about, this is one of those things too. You might be thinking, this doesn't make sense. No place can possess any kind of spirit. No place has a spiritual power. And just for a moment, think about how you relate to your hometown. Or maybe more specifically, the home that you grew up in, or the bedroom that you had when you were a child. You might not call it spiritual, but you relate to that space in a way that is different than the way that you relate to, I don't know, like Walmart in a certain part of Louisiana. It's irrelevant to you. So in a sense, and now I'm just going to make this connection, maybe this is kind of where indigenous religions are, maybe this is kind of how they're thinking about when a space has a certain power. It's okay, throw that out if you don't think that that's a worthwhile thing to think through, but I think it might be. Okay, let me stop here, and then I'm going to pick up. So you could take this as an opportunity. Just stop this video. You don't have to watch the second one until later on in the week or whatever. I'm splitting this up so that you guys are able to just kind of digest these in chunks. So, all right, I'll pick this up in part 2.